There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So hello and welcome to the Home Education for Professionals information session. So tonight we are going to be covering a lot of ground and it will be fairly fast-paced. And if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. So a little bit about us firstly, and then we'll be talking about home education. How does it work? What makes for a good education? How do we achieve it? And what does home education look like on the ground? And then we'll be talking a little bit about School Can't. We're not going to dwell on that because we do have a webinar coming up on Sunday on that. And also we'll be talking about what does it look like when we start home education? What do we need? What are the essentials? A little bit about mental health and also how HEN, the Home Education Network, can help support parents as they start their home education journey. So a bit about us. Presenting tonight are myself, Pavlina, and also Heidi. Heidi is a speech therapist with very extensive experience, and she's been home educating for 5 or 6 years, and she has 3 kids. I have been home educating for 12 years. I have 2 kids. All of our kids are neurodivergent, multiply neurodivergent, as are we. And we have a lot of lived experience of School Can't. We support a lot of families and we talk to a lot of families. So we have a lot of experience in supporting people who are going through difficult times and end up landing in home education. I'd like to sort of start by saying a little bit about grief and guilt. And I want you to sort of keep in mind that a lot of us parents, when we are interacting with professionals, we actually mask our grief and our guilt really well. And a lot of parents need a lot of support and understanding. And if they have mentioned home education, they really do need to be heard. And there's a lot of grief and guilt about not having pulled kids out earlier, about listening to other people's opinions, about doing things in the past that we wouldn't do now, about other kids, our other kids not having as much of us as, we would like them to have because of the challenges that we've been dealing with. So don't underestimate how much grief and guilt parents feel, and, encourage them to repair that and let it go. And a lot of the grief is also about things being different to what we thought, and about, losing careers, about, our kids having a hard time like a lot of us did, because let's face it, our neurodivergent children have at least one neurodivergent parent. And, we've often had a lot of school trauma too. So, treat parents gently when, when they are approaching you about alternatives to education in the school setting. So our 2 main themes that are running through a lot of tonight, and, this will require a bit of a paradigm shift for some people, but we have 2 main themes, and one is represented by the lovely Elsa and another one by the gentleman on the right, Ross Green, who I'm sure a lot of you have come across. So it's about reframing expectations and also reframing challenges. And by reframing expectations, I mean letting go of, let it go, let it go. Don't they have to? But don't they have to? Don't they have to do these things? And, it's about reframing expectations, examining our biases, examining societal expectations and constructs, thinking about what paradigm we're operating in, thinking about the assumptions that we're dealing with, and also how do we think about, well, why do kids have to do things? Do they really have to do things? Expectations about, well, do they need to do daily book work? Spoiler alert, no, they don't. The whole societal construct of falling behind and comparing kids with where they should be, and also, engaging with opportunities too. And in terms of reframing challenges, kids will do well if they can. So if they could, they would. And if we can keep that in mind, it really, really helps reframe the challenges that kids are having. They are trying their best. And sometimes that looks really maladaptive, and sometimes that is not the way that we as adults find it easy to live with. But they're doing what they're doing in order to cope with the challenges and the demands put on them, and they're not able to cope with. So a little bit about home education and how it works. We're going to whiz through this bit because, this will give you a bit of a taster, but this is not what we really want to discuss at length tonight. So what makes for a good education? What is the goal of education? So for us, and generally speaking, if you ask people, the goal of education is, you want lifelong learners. You want kids to love learning. You want them to know how to learn. You want them to have critical thinking skills, good interpersonal relationships, self-confidence, know how to solve problems. You want them to have great emotional regulation and great emotional intelligence. And those are the things that we generally think of when we think of having a good education. So what skills do we need in order to achieve that? So there's a lot of research, and I'm not going to go into it, but in summary, the things that we really, really need in order to be successful in life, in order to be able to pursue our goals and be self-actualized, we need things like motivation, self-esteem, empathy, interpersonal awareness, commitment to our goals, decision-making, and then obviously all those beautiful 21st century skills that, we like to talk about. So critical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, creativity, innovation, diversity, and also information technology applications. So not just using technology for the sake of using technology, but knowing how to actually apply it. So if we think about content versus skills, so by content, I mean, what you might cover and, if you're following a curriculum, for example, which is more important? What do we really, really need? And a lot of you will have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. It's a way of thinking about how we interact with information. And at the very bottom of that pyramid is remembering. So being able to just recall facts and basic concepts, it's a bit like, memorizing things and then being able to spit it out in a test. Your next level of thinking skills is understanding. That's where you can explain those concepts to someone else. So, at school, we emphasize those bottom two layers. Kids are encouraged to memorize facts and then, be able to reproduce them in an exam or test condition to prove that they remember them. But then if they're lucky, they get to the understanding stage, and that obviously will help them with learning. But what we really, really want them to do is then be able to apply that information, use it in new situations, use it to solve problems, use it to come up with demonstrations of their knowledge, and then analyze. So analyze is the next one up. You want them to be able to draw connections among ideas and be able to question and test hypotheses and things, and then evaluate, which is where you are able to justify your stance on a subject. And then finally, the pinnacle of thinking and interacting with information is to be able to create. So produce something original, produce a new idea, produce a new design, construct something, make a suggestion or an argument, come up with a whole new theory. So that's where we really want kids to be. So content is actually less important than skills, and what we do with that content is more important. So we really want them to have an enthusiasm for learning and a deep understanding and an application of that learning. And the only way we can really do those is by letting them have deep dives. The overstuffed curriculum, and I've done a teaching degree, so the curriculum is definitely overstuffed. There's way too much in there. And what that means is that these kids don't have time to do the deep dives that we really want them to do. They're kind of coasting on the surface all the time. It also means that if you have any learning difficulties, it makes it exceptionally difficult to interact with that information because it's not accessible to you. And that produces a lot of anxiety and stress. And they don't get time to develop those beautiful thinking skills, the application, the analysis, the evaluation, and finally the creation of new things. So they don't get time to do the examination, the inquiry, critical thinking and reasoning. They don't get time to communicate those ideas and to develop good communication skills and to get to understand the implications of that information and to also put it in context, like cultural, societal, and environmental contexts. They don't get to use technology, and they also don't get diverse learning across a broad range unless they're given all that time to do those deep dives and to explore. So how do we achieve it? And, a lot of the time people will say, well, this kid's really disengaged and they're not particularly interested in engaging with information. They're not really interested in doing those deep dives because they just don't have that headspace. And a lot of these kids are so anxious and stressed by the environment and by the demands that they can't cope with, that they are really unable to engage with the material in anything other than a very superficial way. And a lot of the people will say, well, they're so disengaged. How are they going to do anything when they come out and they start home educating and they start talking about motivation? Which brings us to Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. So Maslow stated that people are motivated to achieve certain needs and that some needs will take precedence over others. So our most basic need, right down the bottom there, is physiological needs. And so that need is for physical survival. And that will be the first thing that motivates our behavior. So motivational theory talks about, well, what motivates us to actually do things? So once our physiological needs, so air, food, water, shelter, all those things are taken care of, then we worry about our safety needs and we're motivated by safety. And if we're not feeling safe, we cannot be motivated to move up those levels. The next level up is what motivates us once we've satisfied the safety needs, which is love and belonging, and then esteem, and then self-actualization. So since then, we've added, cognitive needs and aesthetic needs before the self-actualization needs. But, as a general concept, keeping in mind, safety is where a lot of kids are stuck. They're stuck at that feeling of needing to feel safe. A lot of the time that school environment does not feel like a safe environment for them, whereas home is safe. And that feeling of safety then allows them to pursue other things. It allows them to have the time to be able to do those deep dives, engage in learning, explore things, rediscover their love of learning and rediscover their curiosity. Because until we satisfy those safety needs, they are unable to really have a decent education. So what research tells us about how we learn? So we know that the way people learn best is when they're engaged in the topics that they're interested in. And basically, if you are not interested in a subject, it's very difficult to engage with it. And we know this as adults. I'm not particularly interested in economics. And if someone tries to talk to me about economics, I'll be interested on a very superficial level for a short period of time. But after that, I'm not particularly motivated to be doing deep dives and to maybe be memorizing information and then using it, utilizing it. That's not where my love lies. That's not my passion. For other people, economics is their passion. And great, great that we've got so many different people who are interested in so many different things. But where, our real enthusiasm for learning and where we start to develop those beautiful critical thinking skills is when we're actually engaged in the things that we love. So the parent's role in home education is to facilitate. So Vygotsky came up with his what he coined the zone of proximal development. So if we think about a skill, there's what the learner can do unaided. So let's say, for example, we're talking about a toddler learning to walk, or a 14-month-old, 16-month-old child learning to walk. There's the things that they can do unaided. They might be able to pull themselves up on a piece of furniture completely unaided. They can reach up, they can pull themselves to standing. What they cannot do is they cannot let go of that piece of furniture and walk across the room. But in between those two, you have the zone of proximal development, what they can do with guidance and with support and with assistance and scaffolding. And that is where we want our kids to sit. We want them to sit in the zone of proximal development. And that's where the parent's role is. Our role is to facilitate. So for that child learning to walk, we're going to hold their hand while they walk across the room until they're able to do that by themselves. And just as parents, we naturally have that intuitive understanding of what that child needs when they're learning to walk. If we allow ourselves to tune in, what you will find is that parents are really good at tuning into what their children need in other areas as well, and that includes their education. And so our role is to facilitate education. So sometimes parents will provide the guidance, and sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually find mentors in whatever form that is who can do this. And we also give our children the skills to find the mentors and to find those resources themselves. So, we might help them find a class in geology, if that's what they're interested in. If they're interested in rocks, I might not know something about rocks, but then I can find someone who does know about rocks and hook my kid up with them. Maybe they do some classes, maybe they do some excursions. Perhaps their mentor is a peer. It could be another child who's very deep interest is rocks, and they can help them with that. So that's how home education works. And Vygotsky also told us that, there are certain tenets, 4 basic principles of learning. One is that children construct their own knowledge. They're not these blank canvases and, you open their head and you put information in. Children construct their own understanding of the world. They construct their own knowledge. They go out, they find information, they hear things, and they put that into their little web of understanding and gradually adjust it. Development cannot be separated from its social context. So development is a very social thing. And, home education is very social. It's very supported by parents, and parents support that child's development. And learning can actually lead development. And also, we know that language plays a central role in mental development. There's a lot of talking and conversational learning and things, which we'll cover in a minute. So an important question for you: have you learned anything since leaving school? And when I ask that, people think, well, yes, of course I have. But that is, if you think about what you've learned and how you've learned it, that is how home education works. Basically, you are interested in a subject. Say, for example, I want to learn to knit. I'm either, if I'm a very visual learner, I might go and find myself a YouTube video. If I am very kinesthetic, I might try doing it myself. I might try and find a mentor who can show me how to do it, maybe sit next to me and show me how to do it on their needles while I do it on my needles. We learn so many things intuitively and naturally based on our preferences. And this is how home education works too. It's about being child-centered and child-led and thinking about what that child needs, how they learn best, and then following that. So there are lots and lots of learning opportunities in every single moment of every single day. And one of the mainstays of home education is conversational learning and incidental learning. And what I mean by that, for example, on the left is a shopping list that I started writing. And then one of my kids years and years ago came along and said, "What you doing, Mama?" And I said, "I'm writing a shopping list." And they wanted to join in with that. And they were just learning to create letters. They were learning about writing, and they wanted to contribute to the shopping list. That's a perfect example of incidental learning. And those opportunities come up every single day in so many ways, whether it's doing maths while cooking, whether it's, discovering an insect while you're gardening and then, going and doing a Google search on it and then finding out about it. All those opportunities are real opportunities for learning. And then on the right there is Braille, where you come across Braille on the toilets at the park. And then a whole conversation ensues about, how other people see the world. And, it's a different language, effectively, it's a different written language. And talking about, well, why do we have it? So, you're talking about social constructs. You're also talking about, thinking about the world from other people's perspectives, but also, learning about different languages, effectively. So this little blurb, I'm going to read it out to you in case you have different access needs. So how does a homeschool family change a light bulb? So first, mum checks 3 books on electricity out of the library. Then the kids make models of light bulbs, read a biography of Thomas Edison, and do a skit on his life. Then everyone studies the history of lighting methods, wrapping up with dipping their own candles. Next, everyone takes a trip to the store where they compare types of light bulbs as well as prices and figure out how much change they'll get if they buy 2 bulbs for $1.99 and pay with a $5 bill. On the way home, a discussion develops over the history of money and also Abraham Lincoln, as his picture is on the $5 bill. After building a homemade ladder out of branches dragged from the woods, the new light bulb is installed, and there is light. Clearly, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but this is how home education works. It's very much about curiosity. I wonder questions, I wonder questions from parents, but also from children, following their leads, taking advantage of opportunities, being spontaneous and having big conversations about things. And, you might follow that thread. One of the kids might become so interested in electricity that they become an electrician, but they might also just leave it there and not think about it very, very much again until next time they come across it. So excursions are a great opportunity. There's heaps of excursions to all sorts of interesting places from, outdoors, Acme, museums, all sorts of opportunities for all sorts of learning. The breadth and the depth of them is only limited by our imagination. Other opportunities are groups, teamwork, lots of friendships and collaboration. So people worry so much about the social aspect of home ed. And once kids are able to leave the house, so a lot of kids who come into home education struggle to leave the house. But once they're able to do that, there is a very vibrant community out there. There's classes on every day of the week during the day. There's camps. Kids get together, they work on projects together. It doesn't have to be a formal working together on projects. Like, for example, down the bottom left there, the kids building something together at the beach. They're collaborating, they're negotiating, they're planning things together, they're coming up with a common goal and working towards it together. And that's what teamwork is. And that's where they're practicing their teamwork skills. They don't have to be sitting down practicing it on book work. Camps are fantastic, so down the bottom in the middle there, the Sovereign Hill Camp, for example, lots of learning opportunities there, heaps and heaps of variety, and again, only limited by your imagination. Games are a fantastic way of learning. So whether it's board games, whether it's something like word games or maths puzzles, whatever it is, there's learning all around us all the time. So I'm hoping nobody has any concerns about socialization. And, there are opportunities to socialize at all levels, no matter what you're ready for. If you're not ready to leave the house, you can actually make connections online when you're ready. And we should never discount the value of online friends. A lot of kids get a lot of great friendships from online connections, and we should not discount that as a form of socialization. So learning difficulties, this is going to require a bit of a paradigm shift for some people. I know that, as therapists, a lot of the time, the push is to kind of try and help fix things, but that's not always in a kid's interests necessarily in some ways, and we'll talk about that some more in a minute. So learning difficulties, whatever they are, we have a number of options. We can let it go. And letting it go a lot of the time is what we need to do, especially at the start of home education when those kids are so overloaded and overwhelmed. A lot of kids are not really ready to tackle any of the things that they struggle with. They just really need some time to decompress, and letting it go is a great option for a lot of kids. And it's also possible for kids lifelong. I mean, I have things that I struggle with that I let go of and then work around. And it's about figuring out where those holes are, where are those challenges, and, do I really need to worry about that so much right now? Can I work around it? Do I have other alternatives? Can I find supports? How do I support this thing that this child finds difficult or challenging? For example, if they're dyslexic, instead of insisting on constantly trying to learn to read because they're not quite developmentally ready for it, We can listen to audiobooks. We can use apps like Natural Reader, which will read out whole slabs of text for us. There's lots and lots of supports that we can put in place so kids can still access the things that they want to access without needing to be concerned about fixing all the things all at once. Focus on their strengths. This is so important because when we focus on their strengths, their self-esteem builds as well. It's very, very easy to worry about all the challenges that they have and forget to celebrate what they're really good at. And if you take what they're good at and run with it, those kids will fly. And also, finally, you can tackle it when the child wants to. So sometimes kids will get to the point where they're developmentally ready to tackle something. And, I go back to dyslexia. There comes a point where that kid says, okay, I'm ready now. They might not say it directly, but you can sort of start to see inklings where that kid is sort of starting to neurologically be ready to cope with the demands that reading is going to put on them. And you can sort of start to scaffold that. A quick word on teens, because this is something people worry about. They worry about further education. They worry about jobs and all those sorts of things. So a very quick word about teens. So we do have a publication called Other Ways to University and Careers. Very, very briefly, home ed kids can absolutely go to university. And the way they go there, the way they take pathways to university is very much the same as the pathways that a mature age student would use who doesn't have an ATAR. They don't need year 12 qualifications. They can do TAFE, they can do open uni, they can do bridging courses. They can learn the things that they missed earlier that they've decided are important. If they need to, they don't have to have an ATAR to go to university. This is just some examples from stuff that my kid's done for. So one of my children is now 17 and he's interested in all sorts of things. He does his sport. He trains a lot of hours in his sport every week. He coaches and judges in that sport, but he's also interested in other things. And he's interested in, say, 3D modeling with Blender. He's written apps, and they're all things that are relevant to him, relevant to his life, and that he is interested in. So he is pursuing the things that he's interested in, and he's self-taught in these things too. So, you can't discount the power of a child being enthusiastic about something to teach them things. So parents are facilitators. Basically, encourage them to follow their child's lead. That child is perfectly capable of taking the reins of their education. It's not something that we traditionally think about with children. We don't necessarily put a lot of trust in kids knowing what they need, but they absolutely do if we allow them the freedom to choose. Build community. So community and connection to community is vital for success in home education. And even if that child is not able to access the community because they're unable to leave the house, encouraging parents and supporting parents to find their local community, but also online home ed communities can be really, really valuable and has been shown to be a fantastic support, not only for learning, but also for asking for help to find resources. Where do I find? My kid's interested in XYZ. Where do I find this? But also, there's a lot of people in the community who have been through really hard things with their own kids and can also support and provide guidance and suggestions and also, just community, just to help prop up that parent emotionally too. Asking for help. Asking for help is super important, and it's very much encouraged in the home ed community, and it's a very welcoming, warm community by and large. It's very supportive, non-judgmental. A lot of people have been through a lot of hard things. So modeling is another great thing for parents to do. It's one great way of kids learning stuff. So, we model mistakes, we model learning new things, how to learn, oh, I want to learn how to knit, this is what I'm going to do to learn it. Modeling curiosity, with all those I wonder question, I wonder who, what, how, why. Modeling repair, because, you know, a lot of the times the wheels fall off and then you repair and you glue those wheels back on and the next day is a new day. And also modeling problem solving, you know, oh, I have this problem that's happened, you know, I'm going to model with my kid how I'm going to solve my problem and, you know, maybe verbalize it, talk it through, so that that kid has access to, you know, watching an adult solve a problem. So there are a lot of resources available to home educated parents. This is our landing page on our website. It's a really good starting point for people to start investigating home education and to get help. There's a whole heap of discounts that we offer our members on programs that we've managed to get discounts for. There's a whole lot of information on how to home educate, what it looks like, how to register. We've got videos on there. We've got all sorts of information, and they can always get in touch with us and we will point them to in the right direction if they are struggling to find the information they want. We're just about to put on our website a social story about home education that we've written. And it just basically explains home education and how it works so that it's a bit more accessible to some kids who might not be sure about what they're embarking on and who have no idea about what home education looks like. And hopefully it'll help some parents too. We currently have the the lots of pictures version with big writing. We're going to have another version which has fewer pictures and smaller writing for kids who would prefer that format. So very quickly, school can't. So last year we were involved in the Senate inquiry into school can't. We surveyed over 600 people, responded to our surveys, and we got a lot of really good data on school can't. And you can read more about that on our website. But a couple of things I wanted to talk about. 80% of children with school can't had or were suspected to have a disability, which is a massive number. And that holds true in other data coming from other countries. There was a study late last year that was published from the UK, and their numbers were 90%. Were 90% of kids with school can't were neurodivergent or had disabilities. So what does school can't look like? We're all familiar with this. Can't get out of bed, can't leave the house, anxiety, especially separation anxiety, tears, meltdown, self-harming and more. But also another big one is the quietly imploding. That's when kids are really shut down at school. They're often masking, and then when they get home with mum where it's safer, they are experiencing all the things. And, you know, you cannot discount parents' descriptions of what it's like when that kid is in their safe place and they unload and they let it all go and let it all out. So the effects of school can't: trauma, burnout, dysregulation, learned helplessness, and so much more. But what we found in our surveys was that once those kids were pulled out, the difference that home education has made to their life has been staggering. So we found that the improvements in mental health, like over 99% of kids had improvements in mental health, which is massive. But there were also improvements in other areas: family dynamics, friendships, interest in learning, confidence, range of interests, engagement in excursions, you know, willingness to try new things, their relationships with their parents or, you know, family life generally, and also their ability to regulate their emotions. So if you're starting out, if one of your families is starting out in home education, there's a few things we would like you to keep in mind. So back to our two themes, I'm reminding you, reframe your expectations and reframe your challenges. You know, let it go, and kids will do well if they can. So the child has been removed from school. So now what? We need to remove expectations. We need to offer opportunities, but accept if they're rejected. If that child says no thanks, that's fine, leave it there. observe encourage parents to observe their kids and give them time. Observe their kids and, think about, well, how does this kid like to learn? What are they interested in? What do they like to engage in? We need to deschool. Think summer holidays. It's a massive process for parents and kids. It's a change in thinking about education and what learning looks like. It's rethinking and reimagining education and learning that, coming to the conclusion that you don't have to be in a school environment in order to learn. And how long it takes is, the theory says 1 month per year of school. In reality, especially for neurodivergent kids and especially for kids who are in burnout, it can take a lot longer than that. We also need to let go of things like the idea of keeping up. There's no keeping up. We don't need to compare with anybody else. You are where you are, and you just need to meet that child where they're at. So at the start, they're often hiding under the doona, constant gaming. You need to make accommodations and adjust your expectations. And the adjustments that are needed at the start will not be forever. They're for right now. As they decompress, their capacity will increase. And we see this over and over and over again. And we keep telling parents, just keep going, and it will happen. And then 6 months later, a year later, they turn around and they look at the kid that they have now, compare it to the kid that they have, and they're, wow, look how far we've come. It can be very slow. It can be very incremental. It can be just tiny little glimmers of things, like maybe that kid will come out and actually say hello when they come out to get a drink of water, whereas previously they weren't able to talk to anyone. It can be really subtle little changes, but those changes are really significant. So if they do nothing else, deschool. So we want trauma recovery. We want to prioritize mental health. So once they're feeling safe and regulated, leaving the house will be possible. Trying new things will happen. You'll be able to foster independence. That, you cannot feel independent. You cannot, exercise your independence unless you're feeling safe, and unless you have a safe place to come back to, and you have a safe place to land, and someone who can co-regulate with you if you need it. You cannot become independent. Flight responses reduce. The need for strict routine goes. For the vast majority of kids, they sort of turns into more of a rhythm than a very strict, structured routine. You'll have rhythm to your days rather than a strict routine. Impulsivity greatly increases, and so does anxiety. And frustration tolerance develops. It's, you really need to be able to have access to your frontal lobes and lower anxiety in order to be able to exercise your frustration tolerance and your problem solving. And it will take as long as it takes. It's trauma recovery. You just have to prioritize their mental health. So what happens if we try school at home? So even when they've decompressed and found safety and regulation, there are many ways to do home ed, and home ed is not remote schooling. You can revisit trauma on them if you try to do school at home. If you try to do school at home, what you're doing is you're often bringing in the thing that was traumatic into their safe place, which is home. So reimagine education. Work on that deschooling process. Encourage parents to work on that deschooling process. And also, with the families you support, you can help encourage that process by deschooling yourself. And think about their autonomy, whether they have a PDA profile and they're autistic or not. If you just think about autonomy and what that kid needs, and you put the child at the center, you cannot go wrong. So, statements like, how do I get my child to, those are leaning towards taking away kids' autonomy, and they're just going to send them backwards. Paid curriculum means that the curriculum is at the center, not the child. So we don't generally, unless you are getting paying for some curriculum that is very specific to, say, a subject or a topic that that child is really interested in, we don't encourage people to get, a box out of the box paid curriculum. It's not necessarily going to serve that child. And we often find that parents will invest money in that and then will regret that decision because it's not suited to that child. It doesn't have the child at the center. And, things like, how do I set work and get them to do it? Those sorts of questions, if you hear those sorts of questions, then you know that, we're not really keeping the kid at the center of the process. And I want to take a second, because a lot of the time the impetus and the pressure on therapists, teachers is to use that child's interest to try and engage them. And that is a different thing to actually being child-led. If you are child-led, then you are actually following their goals, you're following their interests, and you're also letting them explore things in the way that they are comfortable with. Once we start manipulating their interests to try and, engage them, we actually run the risk, especially with an autistic kid with a PDA profile, of breaking that interest and turning them off that interest. So just be really careful with that distinction. So some central ideas that we've covered. So deschooling, so important. Rhythm versus structure. So, having a rhythm to your days as opposed to a very strict structure. And that will gradually develop as families decompress. So encourage them to, use structure if that kid needs it, but also to let go of that structure as that child does no longer need it so much. Incidental versus and conversational learning are the mainstays. Be child-led. Learning styles, lots of different ways of learning. There's a lot of asynchronous development, lots of strengths and then some challenges, and think about what you want to do with those challenges. Resources are out there and, easy to find if you know where to look. Encourage parents to join some Facebook groups. You can help them navigate that if they're really not emotionally ready yet. A lot of parents are really struggling to engage with things. They're in a constant state of stress, PTSD, a lot of them. So, they do need a lot of support to try and find resources and things at the start. We've talked about motivation, redefining success, think about your strengths, not deficits, and the socialization question. I want a quick word about mental health and building resilience. So resilience has become a very weaponized word. It's something that we hear a lot, and unfortunately the word has been co-opted and misused. And it's not about putting up with stuff and learned helplessness. It's about safety. It's about flexibility. It's about problem solving. It's about communication and reframing and community. And it's also about anxiety and frustration tolerance. And often the whole family is in crisis, and we can't be expecting to get all these things right straight away. And resilience will come. We talk about separation anxiety. It's not a term that we particularly like. It's basically putting the blame on the child and putting the focus on the child, and thinking about the child as having a problem, whereas it's really a need for co-regulation. And that the mental health improvements come when that child can re-find that trust and can find that sense of safety and is able to co-regulate with a trusted adult. And see it happen all the time in so many kids who have come out in burnout in a state of constant anxiety and learned helplessness. And it does get better. So managing therapies, sorry. Again, this is perhaps going to be a bit challenging for some people to hear. And it can also challenge, the way that you have been told to approach your craft and your work. And I think it's worth thinking about these things from a kid's perspective. And again, we're very child-centered and child-led. So I would like to encourage you to think about your goals. Are they ableist? Do they fail the dead man test? And the dead man test is, if a dead man could do it better, it's not a good goal. So sitting still, dead man can do that better, not a good goal. Sitting quietly, dead man can do that better, not a good goal. So to me, it's a really good test of what are we actually really wanting for that child. Think about, why do we want that goal? What is the purpose of it? Who is it serving? And is it serving that child? If it's not serving that child, then we should probably rethink it. Is it neuroaffirming? Does it respect their neurobiology? Does it value and treasure the person that they are? Does it keep their, does it preserve who they are as a neurodivergent person? Is it child-centered? Is that kid at the center of everything that we do? Because it should be, because if therapy is about the child, and the child should be the center of it. Finally, do they want to go to therapy? And why or why not do they want to go to therapy? Do they or do they not want to go to therapy? And there's a lot of kids, especially teens, who have disengaged and don't want to go to therapy. A lot of that is about trauma. A lot of that is about feeling pressured with expectations and feeling like, if I go, then people are going to try and make me do things. And that is especially true of kids with a PDA profile, and loss of trust and loss of, feeling of safety. So if they don't want to do therapy, think about how you're going to use those sessions. Perhaps you engage with parents instead, and, spend that time helping parents and supporting the parent instead of trying to do a one-on-one with a child. So some must-haves, in summary: community for the parents, for the kids. Ask community for help with parent support, finding resources, social engagement for parents, even if it's online. Connections and decompression and recovery. Those are the absolute must-haves. So overcoming barriers. So there's a lot of barriers that people feel are stopping them from home educating, and there's a lot of them. So deschooling. Deschooling helps us overcome mental barriers. Socialization is a concern for some people, and we've dealt with that. Work and finances. So those are two big ones, and it's not the time to get into that right now, but there are definite workarounds. It's about reprioritizing, reimagining work, all those things. And there's a lot of support and information on our website. There's support and information in the community for that. Registration requirements, we can help with that. So parent factors such as illness, disability, education, their relationship with the child, worrying about outcomes, those can all feel like barriers to parents. And those are things that, you can help support them with, and that we can also help support them with too. Others, perceptions and influence. Professionals are a very big influence on families. Families trust the professionals that they see. And, as professionals, I think it's really important to be supportive. And if a parent mentions home education or is, perhaps hinting at it, supporting that, the exploration of that choice and what that might look like, and encouraging them to get more information, and perhaps helping them to do that. Community and where to find it, and school opposition is often a big barrier that people find. And finally, I just want to say that the child you home educate is nothing like the child you send to school. Like, that is a really important point. And I think parents need to know that, because the kid that you are sending to school is traumatized. They're constantly being re-traumatized. They're carrying a lot of stress. They're carrying a lot of anxiety, and that plays out at home. And a lot of them, PDA profile, they might be trying to equalize with their siblings, and that can add an extra layer of challenge for parents too. So how can HEN help? We provide one-on-one support. So we do that via email, SMS, phone. We will often start talking to people online, in different forums, in different Facebook groups. We will provide help and support there too. We provide webinars, information sessions, and support groups that parents can join. We understand the regulations. We've got lots of videos on our website for different states. across Australia because the regulations do vary by state. And we can help with learning plans and reviews in Victoria. And in other states, we can point them to where they can get assistance because we have a good network across Australia of people who can help. We can help with developing community connections, and we can provide advice. We can also provide advocacy. So we can advocate with BRQA, who are fantastic and we've got a great relationship with. They're the registration authority that you register with for home education. We can also provide advocacy with schools when needed at times. Like, we are volunteers. So, you know, our time is limited, but we are absolutely able to do that when people are desperate. We can also help them with figuring out how to overcome barriers. A very brief word on regulations and registration. Basically, encourage them to join local groups for help and support. Regulations vary a great deal by state and territory. There's lots of information, some videos on our website. We've made videos for 5 of the 8 states and territories. I'd encourage them to go and have a look. They were actually filmed with other home educators in other states. So help is available through state-based groups as well. So in summary, patience with the parent and the child, and even for the skeptics, because they're struggling too. They need time to decompress and time for the parent to observe the kid, space for the kid to be who they are and find safety again, community for parents and eventually for the kid as well, curiosity in all the things. So I wonder questions, repair for the whole family. And I think that's where professionals can really, really help, is with that repair process. And helping parents forgive themselves, because that often requires support. And connection and relationship. It's what being human is all about. So home education for the win. There are many ways to do home ed. Home ed's not remote schooling, and it's amazing. And they will come out at the other end and they will find their place in the world, but it can take time. So, any questions?
Thank you so much, Pav. I just want to encourage anyone to pop questions in the Q&A box. And I did want to mention our website address. I don't know if that was specifically on any of the slides, but it's, let me look that one up real quick. It's home/ed, not slash, home-ed.vic.edu.au, but you will also receive a link to that in our follow-up email after this evening's webinar. There is a question in the box already. I just did want to touch on the role of therapists as well. You did talk quite a deal about that, but I think it's really important to remember that whatever kind of therapy you're offering or whatever kind of professional support you're offering for a family, your role is essentially quite different when you're working with a home education family than it is when you're working with a family with children who are attending school, or, you know, attending school easily compared to those who aren't. And remembering that the family are the experts, the parents and the child are the experts in themselves and their own situation. We're not needing to set children up for school-based skills either. So we're not necessarily working towards goals like sitting at a table at a non-preferred task for 5 minutes. Those types of things are less relevant for families who are home educating. So revisiting those goals again is really important as well. And Pav, you did mention, but I thought it was good to revisit as well. You talked a bit in the beginning about learning difficulties and talking about workarounds and supports for that. So just framing that in terms of accommodations, I think is really important, that we recognise that we're not letting go of expectations or achievements or anything like that. We're just supporting and accommodating kids and young people to meet their particular needs in ways that work for them. So I thought that was worth revisiting as well. Let me have a look at this question, and if anybody else wants to pop any questions in the chat box, we'll get to that as well. So the first one is, I understand that a lot of homeschooling is interest-based. How about building resilience towards activity subjects that are not preferable but important, for example, math? I think you talk quite well about interest-led learning and child-led, and the incidental ways that we can learn, but perhaps you wanted to talk a little bit more about those. I mean, I really actually dislike the term non-preferred, but that's a bugbear of mine anyway. I'll let you delve into that one a little bit.
Okay. So this it's a bit of a paradigm shift for people, I think. Would you agree, Heidi, that, thinking about education and what it means? So if you have a child who is really highly resistant to doing an activity, say maths, that a lot of kids come out of school, with dyscalculia. And let's take maths as a perfect example, because that's one of my little pet peeves and pet topics. Because human beings are born with perfect maths brains, and dyscalculia, in a lot of research, it suggests that dyscalculia is actually caused by human beings, and that it doesn't actually need to exist, but we cause it by imposing algorithms on kids and ways of conceptualizing numbers and interacting with that information in a way that is not natural for that particular child. And so we actually break their maths brains. To put it very bluntly. There's actually a fantastic book called What's Math Got to Do with It by Joe Bowler, if people are interested. And, things like maths, which can meet with a lot of resistance from kids, I would say, let it go. This is an Elsa moment. Maths is all around us. You can't help but be immersed in maths all the time. And so that child will come across maths when they're cooking. They'll come across maths when they're shopping. They'll come across maths when they're learning to budget. And there's elements of maths that are important for day-to-day life in a modern world. And that child will interact with maths in the way that is important by doing all normal day-to-day things. If you want that child to become good at doing algorithms, which is not really what math's about, and mathematicians will tell you that algorithms and the things that kids do at school that we call maths are not what mathematicians say is maths, then you can let go of all those algorithms. If that child, say they're age 16, decides to be a pilot and all of a sudden they need maths, or they decide that they want to be an engineer and they need maths, they will then pursue that, and they will actually pursue that with fervor and enthusiasm because it is important to them. It has become important to what they want to do and what they want to pursue. And they will pursue it and they will achieve at it. And you will find, the parents will find resources and ways of helping that child develop those skills when they become important. And that child will do it themselves. And, it is definitely a paradigm shift for people to let go of the idea that kids have to do all the things at the time when the curriculum suggests that that child should be doing things. And for example, my oldest child decided that he was writing an app and he needed to know about matrices. And so he actually went and found himself a 30-year Washington State University course on matrices so that he could fill in the gaps that he didn't have. So that he did this when he was 15. He went and found that himself. Like, he actually said to me, "Oh, this is what I'm doing." It's like, okay, fine. Kids are very, very motivated to learn when things become relevant to them. When things are not relevant to them, or when they're producing anxiety, they're not going to learn anyway. And so I would encourage you to let go of that whole idea of they have to do non-preferred activities. I think Heidi might have something to say about that too.
I just wanted to, like, maths can actually be lots of fun. It doesn't have to be worksheet maths. It doesn't have to be, following a particular pathway of learning this particular thing from beginning to end. My kid at the moment is using math to plan out how many different cosplay wigs they will need for the rest of the year for all the different conventions they're going to, and how long they need to prepare each individual wig, and what the cost of each of the elements required to make that, and then the cost of attending, so everyday applications of things that I haven't actually had input in for them other than supporting if they ask questions or if they need help. But it's meaningful to them and they're making use of that in really good ways. So, math doesn't have to be what we did math at school. When I started home ed, we had some, year 7, 8, 9 math workbooks that we were working through, and basically bringing my children to tears. They're intelligent kids. They've got math skills. Their brains work quite well, but sitting down and doing it in those ways were not working for their brains. So they're proving to me in different ways that they are learning those things as well. We don't test the same way that schools test to check their level of learning and interest. And I know Pav and I know other home ed kids who have done an entire prep to 12 curriculum of math when they've needed it, because hang on a minute, I need to know this stuff to go to where I'm going next, and done it in a matter of months. It's not something that because you didn't do it at the right time that you don't have that skill or that ability to learn. So I think that's really important to keep in mind.
And I would also add that a lot of the time that resistance, what looks like resistance to learning, is actually because that child's not developmentally ready. And this is a massive concept. It's massively important. And, we don't talk about that in society, about developmental readiness. And developmental readiness, whether it's for reading, whether it's for, calculating, fractions, whatever it is, whatever that skill is, sometimes kids are just not developmentally ready. And what we find when we go hands off and let those kids lead is that they will come to us when they are ready for concepts. And, I did not even realize this. Like, I went to teacher school and, never learnt that really, until I had a massive aha moment with my youngest, who never went to school and developed quite differently, developed her mathsing, I suppose, quite differently to her older brother, who had been at school for a very short period of time in prep, which was enough to set some ideas and ways of thinking in him that then affected his how he interacted with maths later. But with her, who'd never been, I had this massive aha moment of, oh my goodness, I can put things out, I can offer, but she's resistant in that, she'll walk off and say, no, not interested in that, and walk off, but then come back, weeks later or months later when she's developmentally ready for that concept. And so I think that whole curiosity of looking at that kid and thinking about where they're at and offering, but then if they say no, and if they look like they're being resistant to something, thinking about, why is that child resistant? Are they resistant because they're not developmentally ready? And a lot of the time it's not developmentally ready, it's past trauma, or it's just complete lack of interest, and, for a variety of reasons. So, yeah.
Another question is around finding good therapists, which is look, that's a tough one. This person has said, I imagine that everyone who's present tonight is incredibly dedicated, neurodiversity affirming, and trauma informed. But even as a therapist themselves, they can't find a therapist for their own child who meets all those needs. Does the Home Ed Network have a list of various professionals working on updating the list that we have? And we'd love you guys to be involved in that as well. We'd like you to reach out and tell us that, you meet those criteria and that we could refer families onto you. Because it's not just families that are home ed friendly, but generally, therapists that are home ed friendly, but a lot of the therapists who understand home education often have those other skills as well. They often have that neurodiversity affirming framework and understand trauma-informed practice. So I think there is a lot of crossover there. So creating that list is definitely on our radar. So keep an eye out for that, but also reach out to us.
Yes, please do. Please do reach out. So we're going to send an email out after tonight, and on there, you can reply to that, and we will add you to our neuroaffirming home ed friendly professionals list if you can tell us how you fit the bill. We already have a site that lists home ed friendly professionals, and in our experience, if professionals are home ed friendly, they're generally more neuroaffirming. The two do go hand in hand a lot of the time. So yes, please send us your details. Next question.
Yep. Thanks for this presentation. It's so helpful. I'd love some suggestions on how to support a family that are homeschooling several children. So their day and night time consists of a lot of gaming, something that we do see a lot of. We'd love your ideas. Is this a let it go scenario or ways of building on this particular interest?
It's both. So if they've only recently started home educating, that explains the constant gaming for a lot of kids. We covered that. It's gaming is a really effective way for a lot of neurodivergent people to decompress and
regulating.
Sorry, say again.
Regulating,
yeah, exactly. And it can be very regulating. And what we find is, the gaming will still be there, but one day those kids will come out and go, and look at the rest of the world and, want to explore the rest of the world, still gaming, but also want to look around. But also we can't discount the value of what a lot of kids get out of gaming. I mean, some games are incredibly diverse in the learning that kids can get from it. We've got a few articles on gaming on our website, and I would encourage you to explore those. And it is also, kind of reimagining. Actually, ChatGTP is a great one for this. If you just type in there, what can kids learn from Roblox or whatever it is, it will come up with a big list of things because people have talked about this for a long time and there's a lot of articles. So ChatGTP is pretty good at going out and getting a lot of diverse information.
There's a particular AI for learning. I can't think of the name of it right now,
Learning Corner.
That might be it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you type in what activity and it tells you all the key learning areas that are potentially being met by that.
Yes. So there's a lot. So yes, it is let it go in terms of, you can keep in that situation, I would keep offering connection, I would keep offering, hey, let's go to the museum all together, or let's go to the beach, or whatever it is that we like doing. Oh gosh, me and the gestures, I'm going to stop that. Try and find things that engage those kids, whether if they have multiple children, it might be a one-on-one. You're taking out this kid to this one thing because this is going to engage that kid. Engage them in other things and keep offering and accept the word no, because a lot of the time they're just not ready. But just keep offering. And we didn't talk about it, but strewing is another really good way of engaging kids. So leaving things lying around that you think they might be interested in. And especially with a lot of PDA kids, you know, you can't just say, here, oh, you love dinosaurs. I got you a dinosaur model to make. And whoa, no way, dude. I am not engaging with that too much. So if you just leave it lying around, or even start building it yourself, just sit there, just doing the thing, you know, and then, oh, what you doing over there? Oh, can I help? It's about, you know, and that's not manipulative. That's just, you know, recognizing that that kid is not able to have something presented straight out in that very direct manner. And, you know, that will automatically lead to shutdown. So, you know, thinking about creative ways to provide opportunities that are acceptable, you know, in ways that are acceptable to that child, and, you know, respecting their neurobiology and their neurobiological needs.
Yeah, so facilitation and offerings, they don't
Yes.
have to be direct. The other thing with gaming and seeking connection is that there are particular places in the community, not just online, but actual physical places in the community where children, young adults, anybody can connect around gaming as well. So things like the lab is in most local government areas. There's which is like a group for, it ends up being mostly neurodivergent kids getting together and gaming and doing computer stuff together. I don't know exactly what they get up to, but there's often programming and things that happen as well. Or just online Minecraft servers with like-minded humans, and reaching out to other families and saying, my kid plays this. I wonder if your kid would be engaged. You know, what other kids are out there that might do that with us? And then you're facilitating some social connections in ways that feel safe for that kid as
Yes.
well.
Yep.
One other question is, some people view parents advocating for homeschool as are permissive, or having permissive parenting styles. So how do we argue against this? I think that's kind of saying that homeschooling sounds like we don't have any expectations and we kind of let kids just run around and do whatever they like.
Yep.
Which is not the reality, but also kind of in a little bit.
Yeah, it's not about permissiveness in that, you know, it's not abandoning, it's not unparenting, right? It's about giving kids agency. And it's not a, you know, I don't like the word permissive, because it comes from an authoritarian perspective. You know, you can only be permissive if you're looking at it from an authoritarian perspective, I think, in that, you know, we're just human beings going about the world respecting other people's needs. And it's about respecting your child's needs and respecting your child's neurobiology. It's about honoring that person for who they are and saying, I trust you to know yourself and to know what you need. And I'm hearing you, and I'm going to help facilitate life and accommodate things so that you can have, you know, the best experience of childhood and of being around in this world that I can give you. And, you know, one definition of unschooling that I like is that it's giving kids permission to explore the world and their interests to the extent that you can withstand. So, you know, you know, all of us have limits, and, you know, where that limit sits is going to vary depending on the family. You know, someone might not care, you know, it might not bother them if the kids do X, Y, Z, but for another family, it might be, okay, you know what, that's a no for me. And it's about negotiating that too, and talking to kids, and, you know, channeling Ross Green, and, you know, doing some collaborative and proactive solutions stuff, you know, like talking about well, okay, I can see that, you are having difficulty with this thing. Here's my perspective on it. Here's my concern. What's your concern? How can we solve this problem? So I think, it's about allowing kids to be who they are and to figure out who they are, because the only way you can work out who you are is by trying it out and practicing that and trying different things, and what do I like and what do I not like, where am I comfortable, where am I uncomfortable, how do I manage my feelings and my emotions, and how can I talk about things with people, and who do I like to interact with. And if you're constantly scripting that, and if you're constantly controlling that, then you're not giving that child the opportunity to really figure out who they are and to be comfortable with who they are and to find that sense of self and that self-actualization, and to actually have the drive to want to figure out their place in the world. So I think permissive is an interesting term, but not particularly descriptive of how a lot of us see the world.
Yeah, I think if we're contrasting to a system that's compliance and control based, home
Mm.
ed is very different in just its conceptualization in general. But that doesn't mean that there's not boundaries, right? So that everyone, as Pav said, has sets their own boundaries and figures out where those lines are for their own families and their own children. But we're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. Whereas control and compliance and those types of themes that run through big organizations for the sake of management, right? It's child management more often than not. Whereas in a
Deficient.
family, each child is entitled to and is encouraged to have their own voice and their own say and their own input um, into how that household works and what the boundaries are and what feels safe and comfortable for everyone. So it is a shift. It is, guaranteed. It can be quite challenging to move from one world into another, and particularly when the majority of the mainstream world works in a different way than what our families might work in our own spaces, in our own homes. So that can be challenging for families to navigate, and that can be an area where they need support and confidence in their ability to do what's right for them and their child. Sometimes the fear is the biggest barrier for a lot of our families considering home ed. So we want to remove some of those fear-based reactions and provide information and support. And that's where you guys come in. The more that other people understand and know what this looks like and how it can work and how it can be successful, the more successful families there are going to be out there who are having happy, healthy kids who are actually thriving, not surviving.
Yep, absolutely. And that's ultimately what we want. We want kids thriving. That's why we do what we do. And we are a volunteer organization, and this is what drives us, is the constant the constant empowerment of families and empowerment of children. And we can't have our kids be good global citizens, and we can't have them you know making a difference in the world if they're not empowered. They're not they're not going to be contributing in meaningful ways and in ways that fulfill them if they're not empowered. Do we have any more
Yep.
questions?
No, that's it. We're all done for questions. So we might be all done for the webinar, which is cool. Finishing early for a change, Pat.
I don't know how that happened. But we are happy to stay on and answer more questions if people have more questions. Always happy to answer more questions. And again, I would encourage you to come along to our webinar on Sunday night. I'll put a link in the email that I'll send out. It's going to be a bit, there'll be bits that will be similar and familiar to tonight, but we'll be going into things in a bit more depth. And a little bit more about how home ed really works. And, it'll be from a parent's perspective, but I think for some people that will be really valuable to think about it from a parent's perspective. And that one is recorded because I talk about my kids quite extensively in that, and there are lots of photos and things that, you know, so we don't record that one.
I'm going to stop recording for this one.